and welcome everyone to another episode of Franki's Open Mic. I'm Haleigh Overseth, your host of Franki's Podcast Network, and I'm joined today by Larry LaMotte. Am I saying LaMotte? Is it LaMotte?
You are, and you are correct, and thank you for saying it right.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have you here today because it turns out, as we've been chatting before the podcast, that you're not just a businessman with a very exciting business that I want us to get into, but you're also a little neurospicy, which means this conversation could go anywhere, and I'm excited to start it. Hi, Larry. How you doing?
Hi, Haleigh. Fine. How are you?
I'm great. So tell us. So I was just on your website. I was actually looking at some of the tiles and things that you have for Recapture It. Can we talk about how did you get into what you're doing now? And like the repurposing of like old materials is really exciting for me. I know you're using it for construction HGTV style, but I would love to use them in art installations. I have some thoughts. But let's start with what you actually do first before I like derail you into another business idea.
Okay. So Haleigh, you touched briefly on the sort of neuro craziness of me, and you said that of yourself as well. Many years ago, I was wandering the worlds of what the heck am I going to do with life, and decided that since I got kind of the right brain, left brain thing, the creativity and the mathematical engineering sort of side too. So what the heck do you do with both of those? Well, architecture seemed like the thing. So I went to college and got an architecture degree. And so that was the start of this. And that's going to tie into what the heck and why are we doing this thing called Recapture It now? So from architecture, I worked off and on in that for 15 years or so. In the midst of that, I went into construction and remodeling. I took things apart. I built them back together. I built our own house in Seattle. And then I took care of other people's buildings and projects as a facilities manager for years too. And along the way, and in the mix of all of that, sort of in that neurological meanderings,
that wandering pathway that was still perfect, even though it was all over the place, right?
It was what it was, and I didn't have all the control over all the economic things that happened, as nobody really does, and so it got to be quite the divergent path. And along the way, I started up 7 different businesses from scratch. And so several years ago, came to a point in life and said, I really need to do something different. I was a little just kind of tired with the things I was in. Like, let's pull out all the plugs. We moved. I sold one business. I stopped participating in another one, got off of all the boards and networks and everything, and just said, we're going to go do this thing that deals with the largest source of waste in the world, construction and demolition waste, which I had a good bit of familiarity with. And I had it at, let's say, the micro level. But once I started to look into the macro level across the country and the world and see what construction creates in its wake and throws away notoriously all day, every day, to the tune of 2 times more than all the trash and garbage you and I and 340 million Americans throw away at home and at work all year long.
That's amazing.
I thought, well, that seems like a worthwhile mess to go tackle. And
good on you for having the neurospicy bravery to be like, I'm going to dump all the excess mess that I have right now for myself. I'm bored of it. I'm going to take up something else. I'm going to pick up an even bigger mess than several businesses at a time. Yep. Well done, you. That's very brave. I love it because I did not know that statistic. That's construction materials. I didn't know it created
construction and demolition waste is a category separate from municipal waste. Municipal waste is the one that is all the trash and garbage and recycling that you and I and 340 million Americans throw away all year long. Well, it's 2 times bigger than that.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And about half of that is roads, bridges, and highways. And the other half is basically buildings. And these fluctuate every year depending on what's getting built and so forth, but roughly half of it. So that's a lot, and it's this scattered mess. And I like to, well, I don't like to, I just do say this: we throw away buildings like paper plates at a picnic. And
There's a comparison, and
yep.
that this is, I mean, I do want to kind of have this conversation with you a little bit too. Obviously, as someone who's dived into like how to repurpose these things, there is a little bit of how do you deal with the, I don't know how you would say it, the sort of sentiment of it when it's like, man, humans, we have so little appreciation for the abundance we have. We just throw things away. I mean, there's kind of two sides to the coin of it, that
Hmm.
that's a lot of waste, but also it's a lot of abundance, and it shows how much abundance there really is. But also, I really do appreciate that you take on something like reusing materials, right? Because it does also, we have a tendency to think that once you're done with something, it has no value anymore, right? If it's not shiny and new, it's not valuable. And I love people like you who are like, no, 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 this is something you can totally reuse. What? Like this still has so much value for so many years. So how do you kind of navigate when you're, sourcing these materials or these things or gathering them? Is there any kind of, I don't know, emotional things that come up when you're kind of seeing that much waste that you're, and like what's the level of sort of ADHD overwhelm that you get when you look at the mass of stuff that you can draw from to collect these materials?
Wow. That is a multifaceted question. So
I know.
thank you. So let's go back to that micro level. So that's just me as the individual, and as a carpenter and a remodeler and so forth, working with other carpenters and remodelers and things, and looking at the job site, and say we're taking down we are cleaning out and remodeling like a old Victorian house in the middle of Seattle, and you take it down to the studs, and you're putting in new electrical and new plumbing and making a new house out of an old one. In the process of that, there's always what the HGTV TV shows, herald
Mhm.
as being sort of the demo. It's demo day, and we get to go take out our aggressions and knock down walls and stuff. Well, that anybody that does that realizes the excitement of that demo day wanes pretty quickly when you're
Mhm.
covered with old plaster dust and splitters and crud. First couple of swings, yeah, but then okay, that's over.
But then it's messy, and you got to have
Then
like
it,
things on your
you,
face so that you're
mhm,
not inhaling particles of stuff.
exactly. So, but in the midst of that, back to the micro level and the emotional aspect of it. So I'm immediately noticing that they're just throwing everything in a dumpster, and I'm like, where are you going with that? What are you doing with those? Why are we throwing away all that new stuff? Well, we just don't have room to store it. Well, what about all those old doors you took out? Well, they're just going in the dumpster. Well, I don't want them to go. Throw them in my truck, and they're like, you're crazy. I'm like, so what? I'm crazy. So I was squirreling away things, scrounging and looking for stuff on job sites, and just putting them in my truck and taking them home, and then cleaning them up. And in the house that I built in Seattle, we put a bunch of doors and beams and just cleaned up old wood, because there's a lot of old wood
Mhm.
that is just gorgeous that we can't even get anymore. And
Mhm.
incorporated that into the house and into the apartment that I built out in it, and so forth. And and then it has story. So that goes into what you're asking there, Haleigh. What about the story of it? So story is a big part of it. As we'll go into the conversation about the bigger picture and the business and so forth, we kind of abstract above that and incorporate the story part of it and the altruism of doing the good thing and all that, and get it into more practical terms of making a business out of it and making business sense out of it, so that actually people want to do it, as opposed to just doing what we've been doing for the last 150 years. So you spoke of abundance. So
Mhm.
we've had enormous abundance, and in the late 1800s into the 1900s, we had the advent of things like the steam engine, and thus big heavy machinery that could knock buildings down. And then there was, prior to that, in late 1800s, was dynamite. Oh well, gee, that became a thing. So dynamite, steam engine, And then this is even an invention, but you might not think of it as one. The wrecking ball. That's an invention. Somebody's, yeah, right.
Somebody just said, would there be an easier way to get
Yep.
this down? Let's get
And
a big,
let's just
heavy
take
thing
this
that
big stick
yeah,
and
you can
throw a
smash it.
ball,
Like,
right?
I mean, somebody was playing a fun game one day when they realized
You
that would
were.
work, and now they're everywhere. And
Yeah.
Miley Cyrus has a song about it.
Yeah, exactly. So we had the abundance of materials, we had the abundance of space, land that we could throw stuff away, and sometimes it just went over into a ravine, and it was just totally careless, and other times it was
Hmm.
more thoughtful and so forth. But that became the norm, and then the fact that convenience and speed and efficiency were such values that were so important, that those became ingrained, the systems became ingrained, the entrenchment in industries became ingrained, and over time, that's just the way things were done. And you and I didn't really notice it. It's like it gets thrown into a dumpster. Okay, well, there's another dumpster. Oh, there's another blank piece of land. What was the building that was there, Haleigh? Wasn't there a store there? Was right? You go by
Yep,
like,
there used to be something
there
there.
was something there. What was it? Right? So we all just watched it, but we didn't really watch it, and we don't do the math to say, well, one dumpster equals, in at one site in one city, times the several hundred that are in the city, or thousands in the
Mhm.
city at the time, times every day, all day, everywhere, what it adds up to. And it's enormous. And now the abundance of land is not so abundant, and
Mhm.
landfills fill up, and landfills are expensive, and modern landfills are not the same just plain old dump site. They've got liners, and you can extract the heavy metals and so forth from the effluent, the water soaking in through the stuff and
Mhm.
filtering out all the chemicals and so forth. Yeah,
All the
yeah,
nastiness and all the things that we're like,
right.
oh, what's wrong with our planet? Oh, we've
Mhm.
just been dumping stuff on it for a
Yeah.
long time.
So they fill up, and then there are higher standards and higher expenses of real estate, and the not in my backyard mentality, and like, okay,
Mhm.
well, what do we do then? Well, cities like San Francisco, they ship it
Well,
all.
and that's something that I mean, I know a lot of people probably are aware of it, but like so much of our trash from our country goes to other countries that just can't fight us off and tell us no.
Yeah,
And it's one of those things that as an individual, it can be really overwhelming because it's like, well, what can I do to alleviate that? I'm just one person, and I still create trash. I can recycle. I can try to be as mindful of my usage of things as possible. But on a collective level, how much impact does that really make when, okay, you're looking at, again, the trash that we create is not nearly as much as this construction materials and like you're saying, roads and bridges and things. So how do we find ways to really repurpose more of these things and use them, and because they are still valuable. You can't, like, obviously you built a whole house and put a whole bunch of it in there. It still functions. It's still sturdy. It's
yep.
still, usable.
And
Why
sometimes it's
just
better
throw it
than it
away?
is now.
This
Right,
is very true. They don't build them like they used to. Isn't a phrase for nothing, right?
right. And there was just a study that just came out about testing old wood from the early 20th century. So the stuff that came out of the old growth forests that grew much more slowly. And if you cut
Hmm.
through it, you could see the rings were very, very tight
Yep.
next to one another, and they were dense, and the wood was very hard and strong. So a recent study came out testing that type of wood that came out of typically older houses and so forth from that time, to the materials that we have now from the forests that we have now, which are sometimes these they're planted for high growth, high speed
Hmm.
growth, which is 20, 30 years. And the difference is, as builders, we all knew the difference, because you could sense it,
Mhm.
you could feel it. It's harder, it's stronger, it doesn't break very easily, it doesn't cut very easily. But
Mhm.
you got to have the engineering on it. You got to put the stamp on it that says, this is actually certified for what you think it is, what you feel it is. Well,
Right.
feelings and thinking about it are not good enough. You actually have to have an engineering grade on it, a stamp. So
Mhm.
this study says, as a cumulative, the old stuff is basically 1.4 times stronger than the new stuff. Okay, well
Oh,
yeah,
that's
that's
like it makes sense. I mean, because
yep,
yeah, nature is going to grow better materials for us, even though it's a slower process than what we do when we sort of speed things up on our own, right?
yeah,
It's so I mean, this is something that I have always been interested in, though. The people who kind of take things like this and turn old materials, old construction materials, or even trash into new building materials. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but I understand that like the process of that is expensive, right? I mean, if you're taking, for example, a bunch of old concrete from roads or bridges and things like that, and having to, go through the process of breaking it all down and repurposing it. I get it. That's expensive. It's a difficult process to do. I'm sure someone out there has a brilliant, bright idea of making that easier. But I love that, you're going out and you're finding things that are immediately reusable, right? There's not a process. You just have to like clean it up and put it in the spot where it goes. If it's a door, if it's a tile. I love the tiles that you have on your website. I was looking at those, some of the old ceramic tile that you found that is just gorgeous. I'm like, I would totally use that to make art. I would
yeah,
use that to
yeah.
do like art installations. I think that's brilliant. But I do really enjoy that the again the repurposing of things, and I kind of wonder, with what you see and with what you do. I mean, does it seem like there could be an easier way to repurpose things, or maybe more
Yep.
channels through which the repurposed materials could be collected? I mean, because
Yes.
how do you go about collecting these? Like you were going to job sites, but like on a larger scale level, like how do you kind of go about gathering up things that are being wasted.
So now, other than at my own home, I'm not doing that actual gathering. So
Mhm.
now I'm more into the conceptual modeling of how do we actually make this happen at a grand scale, at a
Mhm.
national and even global scale, and thinking about things in terms of the the conceptual model of how things work now. So the
Mhm.
conceptual model of how things work now is in the construction world. Things are built. There is a they typically over order materials so that
Mhm.
if there are flawed pieces or cutoffs or they just change something up, they're there already and they don't have to go through the purchasing cycle again. So
Mhm.
that's actually quite a large number. It's roughly around 10% of building projects is overage. Okay, well that's
Mhm.
big in itself. That's not really the big dog though. I mean, there's also the temporary structures that are built around new construction. There's tenant
I didn't
improvements.
think of that, but yeah, when you have construction going on, they put up like little housing for the construction folks
Yep,
for while you're there.
and all those
And
darn
I'm sure
safety railings to keep people from falling off of tall buildings.
I
Gee, what right?
I know, and all I know people get so upset about it.
Well, a lot of countries don't have that, and it's kind of weird to go there and go like, "Oh my gosh, they're just like hanging off
They're
the edge
just
of."
white knuckling it all
Yeah,
day, every day.
yeah, exactly.
Brave
Like
souls.
kind of crazy, but so all that stuff, that's construction job site in terms of the waste as a percentage is only about 10%. So that's it's significant, but it's not the big dog. The big dog is demolition. Take it, just
Okay.
knocking them down, and that looking at that as a conceptual model, it's efficient, it's inexpensive. The demolition companies have they use heavy equipment, and so they have relatively high paid operators. They make good money running cranes and excavators and so forth that take things apart, knock them down and put them
Mhm.
in a truck and haul them off.
Controlled
You don't,
demolitions,
the,
when they just
yeah,
collapse the whole thing?
yeah, you collapse them. There's the implosions and the explosions and the
Yeah.
knock them downs and yes, but it's fast and it's efficient and it They do a great job of it. But so we look at that. It's like, okay, well, that's the fast way. Deconstruction is the way that we advocate for, and that is dismantling of buildings
Hmm.
into its parts. And then you actually save the integrity of each material. A beam is still a beam. It's not a bunch of broken sticks, right? Um,
Hmm.
and yet that takes more time, generally costs more money. We get that. That's fine. But as more of it is done, processes get more efficient, people get better at it, ideas get blossomed up into new efficiencies and so forth. So that's happening already. So the time differential between demolition and deconstruction is diminishing, and the costs are also diminishing. So when you deconstruct a building, you don't have to throw all of it away. So you don't have to pay the landfill, the transfer
Hmm.
station to accept it. So those
Hmm.
add up a lot. So there's another offset there. And then you can either sell directly the materials that you extract out of a building through deconstruction, or you can donate them. Okay,
Well,
so
see,
those are options.
this
Go ahead.
is my brain is neurospicy going down a fun train already. Like I see so much content on social media and things like that of people who are doing like DIY. For example, I saw somebody build a sauna out of pallets.
Yep.
Like you took
Ooh.
they like had a bunch of pallets and
Mhm.
used them to build a sauna. And I was like, that's amazing. So I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, how do you start? And again, I go way out to like, what does it look like if it's done? I don't know the path to get there, but I love the idea of like, okay, get a bunch of these content creators who are DIYers, people like you who love to do the carpentry, the architecture, the building part of it, and start finding these buildings that need to be like, okay, instead of demolishing them, there's got to be people in your community who would volunteer to take that down and deconstruct to use those materials if you just let them have them. So instead of like throwing it away in a dump or paying someone to haul it away or paying someone to deconstruct, just be like, hey, we need to take this building down. Who needs parts for stuff? Like people would come and take that down. People would do that and then turn it into I mean, this could be a whole TV show like HGTV backwards, right? Like this could be a Netflix reality series of content creators. Like, go follow Larry. Larry's going to lead us to the places. We're going to take all these things. No, it's going to be great. We'll have a map and you'll pick out spots that are like, okay, they're going to deconstruct this building. We're going to find all the DIYers in the area and we're going to take out all the useful stuff, and we'll make this so fast you won't even believe it. The blowing a building up will be like, cannot possibly be as fast as a whole bunch of content creators that want free materials coming in and just grabbing them. There's got to be a way to start that funnel somehow.
Well, we've actually thought about that and how we could amplify that grassroots kind of approach. And I thought, well, like, you know, I always look for the best examples that are out there, I mean,
Hmm.
and see what changed the trash problem in Texas was don't mess with Texas. Okay, that's pretty simple, right? And trash on the roadways of Texas was diminished in, I think, 3 years by 60%. Okay, that's a
Ooh,
pretty good turnoff, right?
yeah.
From litter strewn everywhere to more than half of that stopped. Okay, with a
Hmm.
phrase because it really got into the essence of the mindset of Texans, right?
I
Okay, so how
mean,
do we
no
do
one.
that, right?
Yeah, psychology of the individual is like
Yeah,
it takes very little when you really understand it if you get in there and you can get people
yeah.
together on things. That's
So that's
amazing.
where I kind of work now is and you just hit on it, the psychology of the individual. So I thought, well, what could be sort of a universal statement to inspire people to just know of where buildings are coming down, and so this is not a thing yet, and it might not ever be. But I thought, well, why don't we start the demo memo? Did you get the demo memo? And there's
This
and
would be brilliant. Like, let's start it as a Facebook group. You could have it as a like Instagram, like you could have a whole social media movement, the demo memo.
the demo memo,
Where are things having to come down in your community? Add it
yeah.
there, like construction companies and real estate places and businesses that are looking to tear stuff down. List it there and let people come and help you out with it.
And
We need to
yeah,
start this.
and it's not to go to say that, now go make demolition companies the evildoers. It is to say make all of us more aware of what's going on. And just to, did you get the demo memo, Haleigh?
Mhm.
There's and then you are now aware of it, and then like there's 47 in the city, or there's 12 nearby, or whatever, that you're like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. And then you start
Mhm.
to notice them, and then people report them. Kind of like, when you use the app Waze when you're driving, hey, there's a cop at the corner, or there's a wreck over here. It'd be
Mhm.
kind of like that. Hey, there's a new demo memo,
There's a
and
demo going on over there.
right,
Like,
exactly.
how many digital nomads who are into that kind of thing would, I mean, go to a place like that and reclaim materials for their upgraded van that they're doing to go
Yep.
traveling? I really like
We
that
had a
because
gal
that's
on
the
our
kind of
team that
people you
did
would
that.
get.
She had a van. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah,
So,
but anyway,
okay,
s- so we're
well,
going
my
into
other
the different model. And so again,
mhm,
looking at parallels and analogies out in the world already, think of the auto industry.
mhm,
What happens with cars? Well, first they get repaired. Okay. So, and comparing them with buildings. So cars get repaired. Sometimes they get upgraded. Sometimes they get new paint. Um, what happens when you get in a wreck? Well, you got to replace the door or the trunk lid or something. Well, they don't necessarily give you brand new ones. They give you ones from the wrecking yard that
mhm,
disassembled the old car, took the usable doors and trunk lids and hoods and engines and transmissions and stuff out of the old cars, and reuse them. So reuse is high. Reuse of the vehicle, or reuse of the building, is the highest, obviously. Maybe
mhm,
not so obviously. Reuse of the components of the car or the building are next highest. Components being things made out of many parts, right? Doors,
mhm,
the engine, that sort of a thing. And then next down is elements, and taking things apart elementally, like building studs and a beam and that kind of a thing. Or in the
mhm,
car, it might just be the metal, and taking the metal and doing something with that. Okay, so cars, they do this very well. They do the repair, then they do the reuse, and then they do the recycling is typically last. They crush it all together, and they send it over to a foundry and melt it down and make new steel. Okay, that's pretty good. It's not great, not flawless, but it's a good parallel. Now they're not out there waving the green flag, for the last 50 or 100 years that they've been doing this, but they're actually doing what we can emulate with buildings.
mhm, mhm,
Repair them better, renovate them better, give them a new paint job, put on new thermal windows, things like that, to make them more efficient, better, more modernized, and so forth. So use the building first. And if you're not going to use the building, consider, instead of just knocking it down and throwing it away, and recycling, as in grinding up the steel and the concrete, and throwing away everything else, consider the deconstruction and taking it apart for its components, its elements, and so forth, and then finding new homes for them. And it's the finding the new homes that is the critical element here, Haleigh, because of all the good people doing all the good work in the reuse of building materials, only I'm told less than 15% of the available materials, less than 15%, is actually what is processed and reused or recycled or reused in America. Well, that means 85% or more is still going to landfills. So that's the delta. That's the difference that we're working in. How do we get after that? That's
like,
a
that's a
month.
big chunk of
That's a big
materials.
chunk. So I say, well, we're building a new model of distribution of recaptured building materials. And what does that look like? And that takes it out of the altruistic. It doesn't remove the altruistic. It doesn't remove the grassroots. It lets that continue on. But
Mhm,
those parts, the altruism, the wanting to do good, the wanting to do the right thing, the wanting to be good stewards, has only got us to less than 15%. So that's where we are now. So I'm saying we need to do something with the 85%. Well, what is that? Well,
mhm,
another model. Think of used materials as raw materials and process them similarly. So, what happens with raw materials? Well, they get sent to factories, let's say, and they get made
mhm,
into steel components, steel, structural steel stuff, or they get go from a lumber mill or into a lumber mill, and they get made into beams and studs and joists and all that stuff. Okay, why can't we emulate that and use used materials and recaptured materials from all the sources we can get them, whether that's construction sites or demolition sites or deconstruction sites or surplus, which is huge, or urban
Hmm.
mining, which is the proactive extraction of materials of value.
So, like
And
in my mind, when I'm trying to kind of put together, like, how would this work? How would this function? I'm thinking like, how do you kind of, because you mentioned like the demolition companies, right?
yeah,
Or then there is the supply chain companies that are like the lumber mills or the places that are creating the steel beams. So how do you sort of get those places on board? Like, because I'm sure it's difficult to get them to sort of pivot or incorporate the reuse of old materials into what they already do, like you're talking about. So, like, that's kind of in my mind. How do you sort of make it profitable for them to start, right? To start
yep,
going for those old materials and creating processes where, I mean, some of it I suppose has to do probably with demand, right? Like you would need to have more people who have a demand in their own construction or
exactly.
place to have those kinds of materials, right?
You're on it.
And certainly you could do legislation that says, use reused materials first kind of thing. But that can always kind of be, you start getting legislation into it with things and then it gets really dicey and really overly complicated, right? So like how do you kind of like work this model into the existing model and integrate them? And if you are trying to kind of generate demand for it so that they want to and it's profitable, like where is it, just the awareness of it that you kind of need to generate more so that people know to ask for it? I mean, like how do you envision working that in? These are just, I love this. I want to help with it. I want to be of service to this cause because I love it so much. But like what are kind of the things that you've started or maybe run into any kind of like pushback from those, from I guess the institution of construction as it is?
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, you've asked a number of questions in that, and within that, there are some really important ones. The obstacles. The biggest obstacle is one, um, and the financial aspect is probably the biggest.
Mhm.
And then there's the other one that is certification, making sure that the materials that we buy that are used are actually going to be, well, some would like guarantees. Structural materials have to be certified. For instance, lumber has to have a grade on it that says it's
Mhm.
select structural or whatever. And steel, obviously, engineers are notoriously risk averse, and they should be. And so is the
Yeah, you
structural
want the
steel.
building to stay up.
You want the
That's
building to stay up. So all these are legitimate concerns, and how do you deal with all of them? And then the other one, and you touched on that too, and the profitability factor. And over a year ago, I changed our tagline to "Making Reuse Profitable."
yes, and that's because that's kind
Right?
of why it came out in my mind. Okay,
Yeah.
how do you make it profitable
So,
for
yeah,
for others to join you in the cause?
and then you also touched on the demand end of it,
Hmm.
and you talked about policy. So we started going toward policy, and then I said, I kind of pulled the reins back on that and said, let's go policy last, because
Hmm.
policy stays in place whether it's good or bad. And I've
Yes.
seen some that are quite good. There's only a few examples, and I'm talking of deconstruction policy, and some have been quite crude and ineffective. So let's
Misguided.
go policy last. So what do we do to actually incentivize and make it work in the real world with real buyers? Well, who are the real buyers? And that 15% I mentioned that's actually getting processed and out into the world and people are actually using in one way or another now. Okay, well, we're not talking about that because that's still working. Let that happen. What about that 85%? How do we get there? So, coming from architecture, working through construction, working through facilities management, and overseeing other people's projects and buildings and so forth, I got a pretty good understanding of that. Not a great one, but I don't have all the answers, but at least I knew the architects actually specify. They call out, they say, okay, we're going to need this kind of wood. We're going to need this metal, these bricks, these windows, and so forth. They specify them. They don't buy them. The builders that get hired, they buy them. Okay, so the builders, now what are the motivations of the builders? Well, the builders want it to be done efficiently. They want to have their vendors and their timing of their materials on site when they need them. Can't hold up the show, right? Because that's very expensive when you hold up the show. So you got to have the timing right, the quantities right, the qualities right, the materials right, they're usable, all that stuff. Okay, well, so now we understand that, and they buy them. They may buy exactly what the architect specified, or they may buy another vendor's, and they may take an alternative. But okay, then who's next? Who's paying for all that? Well, the building owners, the developers, and the building owners pay the architects, the engineers, and the construction companies to build their buildings, to design and build their buildings. Okay, so they really have the purse strings on all of it. Now, the construction companies may be the deciders as to what materials to actually buy, but they're still beholden to the people that are paying for it all, the building owners. So how do you make it all the way through all of that to make it appealing and financially feasible for the developers and the building owners to go through the construction companies who have to have it fast, efficient, and in their processes, and that architects can specify? And what does that mean? What do they have to do? Well, they got to go to all their vendors, and in today's modern world, they actually go to the vendors' websites and so forth, and they look at the materials that are available, and they get, like anybody, you have stores, Haleigh, that you go shop from, and I do, we all do, right? Well, they do too, and they kind of get stuck in their ways. And this vendor's always really great for the cladding, the outside stuff, and this one's great for windows and so forth. And okay, so how do we get in that mix? And I always used to think, okay, we want them to think reuse first. So the architects think reuse first. So specify it. Well, they got to be able to have it in their tool set. That means putting it online. Well, the current method of processing these materials, for the most part, doesn't do that. Or if they do it at all, they're doing it differently in Georgia than they are in Washington State, than they are in South Dakota, than they are in Massachusetts. Everybody's doing something different.
Well, and everybody has different regulations that they have to follow based on their states. So you have that whole layer of things to get through as well.
So you're right. So it's a big hodgepodge. So again, I'm saying, like, okay, leave them all doing whatever it is they're doing, and they're doing a good job of what they're doing. So that's fine. But we got to build a new model of distribution of recaptured building materials. And that means that we have to play in the sandbox of the people that do that now, with their toys and their tools. Okay, well, what are the toys and tools of architects and engineers and construction companies? Well, that means we got to first of all process things much more volume. They need variety, they need consistency, they need volume. Well, you can't expect a builder to go, okay, well, Haleigh wants us to use used materials. Well, we're building 200 units here, and so I'm going to go to the local salvage store. Well, the salvage store has 7 doors that might work when they need 400.
Right.
Well, and that salvage store may not even have those online. So you actually have to go to the salvage selling store to look at them individually and think, like, okay, well, they're not all the same. They're not exactly what we want. We're going to have to we're out of here, right?
Yeah.
So that current system isn't enough for architects and engineers and so forth. Now, there are some that are trying, and there are some that are establishing relationships that facilitate this, but it's all still quite human to human, and it's not systematized into the technology of today. So we're saying, okay, throw it all into a big processing facility. No retail, all wholesale, all processing, basically a factory. And there are examples in the recycling world called MRFs and other acronyms, and materials recycling facilities and similar things. And some of them even have fancy stuff like robotics that sort things, and they pull it all out, and they sort things. So the plastics are over here, the wood's over here, the metal's over here, the aluminum's over there. Well, okay, following that model, we sort things in a giant facility. and start putting the wood over here, the cabinets over here, the bricks over here, and so forth. And everything gets a barcode. Now, what that really means is everything gets a unique identifier. It may be a barcode, it may be a QR code. Who cares? It's got a unique identifier that goes into a technology system. So it can now
Right.
be inventoried and tracked,
Mm-hmm.
right? Once you can get it into there, and then you put ample information along with it, such as weight and dimensions and other characteristics, and things like specifications and certifications. This is actually a structural steel member that is certified to be what it claims to be. This
Mm-hmm.
is lumber that's certified, and so forth. And you put it all into that system. Well, now it can go play in the playground with the architects and the engineers, because now it can go into their systems.
It's
So
discoverable for them.
it's discoverable for them. And then, so we're working on 3 parts of that. So one is the facility, the processing facility. And we
Mm-hmm.
have what's called a model for that called the Transformation Distribution Center, because you got to have an acronym, right? TDCs,
Because you
right?
gotta.
So
Well, here's the thing that I'm wondering immediately is, are there buildings out there? I'm thinking of like malls that are empty and no longer malls, that you could just like snag that space and be like, okay, this is our new transformation. Say it again.
distribution center. Yep.
Distribution center.
Hmm.
We have this huge parking lot that's empty and this big building that can separate, like with
Imagine that.
pre-separated storefronts. Like,
Yep.
we can put the doors in here, we can put the beams in here, we can put the, what window frames or reclaimed windows in here,
Yep. You're
and
helping me out here,
bring
Haley.
right, bring your stuff
Right?
to the parking lot where it
Yep.
is, set it out here, we'll sort it, get it in here, get it barcoded. Cool. Like, and also repurpose them all.
Repurpose the building itself. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at Kmart's. Remember
Yes,
Kmart's?
I
They're
remember
huge,
Kmart.
right? They're huge,
I
right? They've got truck
they're not,
bays. You can back it in, beep, 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 right?
they're ready to receive already.
There.
There's,
Yep.
yes, there's a
And how
lot of
nice is it
buildings.
to restore an old inoperating building to a new
Mm-hmm.
vital building and workforce and microeconomy within an area that is doing
I
something
love
useful, good for the the all of us. That's right. So
I'm
that's
loving this.
that's actually part one of the conceptual model. The other, and you nailed it. So thank you very much.
I love it. I'm
Yep.
excited. Like, I want to be part of this. How can I help? I'm a creative brain. I don't know, but like, I'm loving all of this. Tell me more.
Okay, good. So there's 2 other parts. Let me throw those out there first. One is
Mhm.
it's technology. So that includes things like there's a marvelous company in Oakland, California called Urban Machine. Urban Machine
Okay.
makes a robotic nail pulling, screw extracting, bolt pulling, clean it up and neaten up the ends and spit out is almost new lumber
Oh
out
wow.
of a building on site in what is really like 2 semi tractor trailers of machinery, but it's going in on one end and it's all ugly and gnarly and it's got nails and staples and screws and stuff in it, and it comes out the other end all cleaned up, ends cleaned up, no metal, it's been scanned, it's been x-rayed, whatever, it's been through the metal detector, and it spits out and it fills up a whole semi tractor trailer of lumber per day. That's pretty good. So there's things like
That's
that.
amazing.
There's a thing called scan to BIM. BIM, BIM stands for Building Information Modeling. Building information modeling is a tool that engineers and architects use to understand the operational efficiencies of buildings over time. The thermal efficiency. If we use this material, will it perform thermally better over time? And things like that. But it has to understand all the components, all the rooms and spaces and volumes and surfaces. Well,
Hmm.
so scan to BIM means you're actually going into an existing building and you're scanning it. And it takes a lot of human effort still, but that's technology's coming along fast.
Hmm.
You scan it, it starts to identify what's in a building, the way it's built, and then you can input information like drawing sets from the city that had the actual construction, and you can understand better and verify, validate that what is, and you start
Mhm.
building these three-dimensional information models, what's called a digital twin of the
Mhm.
actual building, and they can then manipulate that and understand an existing building, and they can quantify the materials that are in the existing building, and then give dollar values of the market value of those materials if they were to be extracted, deconstructed, taken out of the building, and sold on the open market.
And this is how you help the demolition companies and the
Right.
construction companies by saying, "Hey, here's the actual value of this," so that
Exactly.
because you do have to get to the numbers to get to those parts of the
You got to
process,
get to the
I'm
numbers.
sure.
So
Yeah.
that's that part, whole part of making reuse profitable. So how do you
Mhm.
actually get to the numbers, to get to the people that make those decisions based on dollars? The altruism gets us so far. The
Yeah.
policy can be sort of the bulldozer, pushing you in, but
Yeah.
nobody really wants to be bulldozed. But what if
Right.
it was just plain profitable?
Mhm.
And then there's things like, so, okay, so that's back in the technology. So we get the storage and the processing facility, the TDC, that's big.
Mhm.
Then you got the technology, and there's a whole bunch more, but I won't get into all that. But then the third one is really important, and that's that channels of sales and distribution. So the
Mhm.
Recapture It website, a marketplace, is a channel of sales and distribution. There are others. And you might think, well, there's eBay, there's Etsy, there's Amazon, there's all the big dogs out there. Well, you can sell stuff on them. So those are channels of distribution too. Then you got
Mhm.
traditional retail. And I've said since I thought up this idea, I said someday there's going to be the used materials on the shelves of Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards. They're going to be on their shelves. And they're thinking about that too. How could that happen? Well, if it's consistent and it is available and at proper price points and all that, they'll do it.
Mhm.
So understanding those mechanisms of sale, because then builders can go get it, and they can get it in the retail, they can get it in online, they can order it, and they can be confident that they will get the quantity, the quality that they need in the timing that they need, that cannot possibly happen in the current model of processing and distribution of used materials. That's why we're building the new model of recaptured building materials. So
I love this. I'm seeing you starting a podcast where you talk to all the different people in all these different areas so that you can raise the awareness and continue like get them to join your tech platform that you're building to have like all these compendium of resources information. I love the demo memo. Like put that as a No, I
I
do.
do. I do.
Put that as like a part of like the app
Mhm.
where like, hey, you can find out where we're taking things apart and where there's things that you can reclaim, but also
Yep.
check out all the inventory of materials we have.
It just
And I'm
builds
also kind of
awareness,
thinking,
Haleigh. It just builds awareness and puts
well,
it
what
out in
can
the psyche of people, and they're like, now we're
I'm here
aware. Now
for
we
the
can.
awareness.
Right.
I would like, let's start you a podcast of your own. You need to have your own podcast on this topic. I love
Well, I'm
this.
actually starting a mastermind group, which takes that podcast element and brings it into the mastermind world, where you have multiple people conversing about it from different perspectives. So you might have a demolition company that thinks, well, we don't want demolition to go away. That's our bread and butter. Okay, well, what if you morphed into a slightly different version of what you're doing and still do
Right.
what you're doing, but do it better for the new modern approach? And then you'll have somebody over here who's like fiercely, the stewards of materials and zero waste, and you'll have, so you have point counterpoint, but you get like five,
Hmm.
6 people in that conversation, and let them butt heads, let them tell one another what their concerns are, what their obstacles are, and then have
Hmm.
me, the happy facilitator, you know
The happy neurospicy altruistic facilitator here to like extrapolate all the data from the field that you have and turn it into a wonderful solution because we know there is one available. I love it
there is one.
already.
And so, yeah, but then get people out of their offices, out of their silos, and out of their heads, and get them actually talking. And when they do, it's like you go to a conference, Haleigh. I just got to be a speaker at Circularity 2025 in Denver last month, and that
Oh,
was
I love
awesome.
it.
Um, and met so many people and got so buzzed up and excited and learned so many things, and while you're there, you got people on stage that know stuff and they're smart and they're
Mm-hmm.
doing really cool things, but they're most of the time they're not out in the wild
Mm-hmm.
conveying what they know and collaborating with people. And so 3-4 days after the event, it kind of goes, like you're kind of back in the same old, same old. You've captured
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, but you haven't really done everything you could with all that you heard and all that you learned and all the people that you interacted with. You get a few of them. Well, what if?
Mm-hmm.
So what if you took that energy in those types of conversations and panels and experts talking about things, and but not just conveying what they already know or what they're already doing, but collaborating and literally, kind of button heads, talking about the issues and moving the needle forward on a regular basis throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're
I
doing.
I love it. Like, I think that's a brilliant idea. And so I have to throw in a neurospicy kind of like another
Please, I
thought
love the
process
term
here.
neurospicy.
Thank you. So because I'm from South Dakota, agricultural area, right?
Hmm.
Lots of open land. So
Yep.
I'm kind of thinking to myself, like we see where I'm from, you can't miss the random buildings that are just kind of old farmhouses and stuff just standing in the middle of nowhere and just full of badgers,
Yep.
right?
Badgers.
But or whatever's in there,
Yeah, whatever. Yep.
whatever's found its way in,
Yep.
the raccoons and the squirrels and all the critters.
Yeah, exactly.
But there are a lot of, like, when you're talking about like the place in California you mentioned that repurposes the lumber, and like, in my mind, not just for construction of housing or buildings, I'm thinking like, well, fencing for farms. Like, instead of you could reuse the metal for fencing posts. Some people prefer wood posts.
Yep.
You could repurpose that as a wood post. Building, reusing and reclaiming those materials for like the cattle stand kind of shelters and buildings that people have and things like that, or repurposing it to build a new barn. Like,
Yep.
how do you also kind of bring in industries, not just like construction and the demolition, but how do you bring in folks who are from the industries that could utilize that in ways that might be, because I'm thinking to myself, like, what are some of the other things that don't necessarily need to be structurally sound for this for
Right.
a
Yep.
building or a
The
living
aesthetic
space,
parts and the
right?
yeah. Yeah.
And being able to reuse that, and like, what other industries would you bring in? Because like, I obviously, because of where I'm from, I think ag, that's one of the first things that I think about.
Yep.
But what are some of the other industries where people might not necessarily automatically think to reuse or repurpose the building materials or these things? Like, what are some of the other folks you could get interested in this process or in reclaiming these things? Like, where else would it be useful?
Yep. Well, Haley, you mentioned HGTV when we were talking before this,
Yeah.
before the actual recording here. And that's, you see on there people doing really creative stuff. And it's like, wow, who'd have thought of doing
Mhm.
that, something like that with that material? Well,
Mhm.
here's me years ago when I'm thinking up this idea. I'm thinking like, that's got to be a part of it. It can't just be about a marketplace. It can't just be about processing. You got to have the human creative aspect, and the demo memo is part of that. That's the kind
Mhm.
of thing, getting that out in the collective psyche, but down to the individuals, being inspired. So I thought we got to have some sort of a means of communicating things like that. And so I came up with a thing called the BRICK, BRICK. It
Mhm.
stands for building resources for inspiration, community, and knowledge.
Yeah,
So
I love it.
the inspiration part is like Pinterest and like Instagram. So it's pictures. So it's like
Mhm.
people would say to me like, "Well, what would you do with old bricks, man? They just seem so they're kind of crusty." And I'm like, okay, well, here's 12 pictures of how people have done really creative things with used bricks, and they're like, "Oh, what? What? Wow!
You could do what?
Oh,
Why would you? Oh, that looks
oh my god!"
amazing.
People are
Awareness is
Yep.
everything, right?
Awareness is
Like,
everything. And I always think, we have to help one another to think. We tend to not want to think too much because thinking's hard. So help people think.
I
Give them
mean,
some inspiration.
more hands make less work, more
Yep.
minds make less overthinking. Like, bring it
Exactly.
together.
So when you see these beautiful panels, like about 3 foot by 3 foot panels made with the surface of old brick, and so you just actually are installing panels of brick as opposed to individual bricks. Well, that's kind of brilliant. And they've done that in Europe. And then there are
Hmm.
those who make sort of a patchwork, out of it, and more. But I'm just using bricks as a for instance. But so the inspiration part is part of it, and then the community part. Get people out of their offices and out of their heads and out of their silos and talking. So that's kind of where the mastermind fits. And then K is in knowledge, and that so knowledge is a big part of it too. So we have a knowledge base of articles and frankly, companies and organizations around the world that are doing all kinds of cool stuff that if people just knew about them, I say that we've solved 95% or more of our human induced problems in the world. We just haven't been able to implement and execute on it. It's out there. Somebody's already
It's
figured out
out
how to
there.
deal with
Somebody has.
plastic.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is something that I do absolutely believe that,
Yep.
like, if there wasn't so much noise of this is how it is and this is what the problem is,
Right.
there would be so much more room for the voices that have the solutions to get out
Yep.
there. I love
That's
it.
yeah.
I
So
mean, like, the brick is already also a podcast container where you could have panels of people and, like, have a YouTube channel of edutainment stuff of all these research things that you have. I mean, really, I
yeah.
love it. I'm all for it. And we're coming up on an hour. I want to be mindful of your time, but I am just like loving this conversation. So but I do want to. We have to have you back again. You have to come back and continue this conversation because I love it, and I really do think that there are probably a lot of really creative ways that people could come up with. I mean, hit us up in the comments, people. If you're DIYers and construction people and you're artists and creatives and you're community builders, I love this idea. There are materials that are readily available for use that are just like they're there. We just have to, it's kind of like mining resources, but in reverse again, right? Like you're
Yeah.
mining resources that have already been created into the materials. Like, what are the awesome ways to use them? So again, I want to be mindful of your time, even though I feel like we could talk for hours, and I would
We
love to have you back.
probably could.
We could. You need to come back for a Haleigh Daily podcast where I get really neurospicy, and we can just throw every
Haley.
idea
Yeah,
at the
I love
wall.
it.
That's Thank you. We need to. I think we would have some really awesome ideas. But so we do have, I'll have your website and in your LinkedIn profile is going to be in the description. But is there any
Thank
other
you.
things that you want to direct people to go check out? Or like if people want to be included in this mastermind, if there's folks who are in construction, folks who are in the demolition or other industries, where do you want to send people to?
Okay, well, one place on our current website, there's a tab just says consulting. That's one place, and we are doing consulting across America with cities to help them to implement incentives, programs, and policy last to basically build a new regional ecosystem for
I've
this.
got your website right
Yeah.
here. So like
Oh,
we've
there it
got
is.
the
Okay, so
consultant. Yeah, it does. Because I was looking at your tiles that are beautiful.
the consulting
Um,
tab. There it
but
is. These are not
there
paper
it is.
plates or
Recapture it.
coffee.
I
Yeah.
love it.
So
Sorry,
that's
I just wanted
that's
to
one.
just pull that up real quick.
And I am just busy building, and we are building the mastermind group elements now. So we'll have a web page for that, and we have an invitation page for participants. But it will not just be the participants in this case. The people actually doing the discussion. There will be
Mhm.
audience available too, so audience can come to watch this dynamic interaction of experts, people with skin in the game, people with authority and some influence,
Mhm.
getting out of their offices and their silos and into a conversation with other stakeholders and working toward a solution. It may actually involve people partnering on things over time and collaborating. It may be just solving things internally at the moment and going like, oh, why didn't we think of that? Well,
Hmm.
the
Well, because
collective
you didn't have
mind
a
is
conversation with someone that would have made you
exactly
think of it.
right, right. Especially somebody that has sort of a counterpoint to you. And I
Hmm.
mean, being an entrepreneur, you got to go get a customer, right? Well,
Hmm.
that's often a lot more difficult than it sounds. And but having had to do that, we can bring that to a policymaker and say, when you're thinking about the policy and what it does, think of that last person on that supply chain that you will inevitably be influencing, and think, okay, well, who is that? And think of that person and that company and that buyer in advance, as
Hmm.
opposed to just putting a policy in place and letting them figure it out on their own.
Hmm.
Because that figuring it out on their own pretty much results in a multitude of quasi solutions, some legal, some not, and other.
Well, and I mean, I appreciate that you do say the legislation or the policy last, because it is true that, often what happens with policy is that it's people who are not directly in the industries that are writing it. And there are so many nuances and caveats that they miss because they just don't know. Right.
Thank
And
you,
it,
Haleigh.
right. And it's like, we're not trying to say that we're not telling you guys that you're terrible, well intended, and we
No,
appreciate it. But you do need to get the information from the people who are in the trenches doing the thing,
right,
because they're the ones who know what the pitfalls are. And if you create this or that policy, it's going to cause this or that bottleneck or this or that other
right.
issue that, again, they just don't know because that's not their wheelhouse.
That's not their
So this
wheelhouse.
is
That's fine.
but this is why I think it's also brilliant to get that mastermind together, because then you have a compendium, a conversation of information and knowledge and thought processes that can go into like, okay, these are the kind of things that you should be taking to policymakers, that like they aren't going to understand this part of it, right? So that's, I really do appreciate that perspective and that putting it, because it's true. Like we mean well when we want to change those things,
Hmm.
but we don't always actually get in on the ground floor and see, okay, how does this implement actually function, right, when you
Right.
put that into place.
You can't just plug and play a template and expect it to
Mm-hmm.
work in one, say, very affluent city in California, and then
Right.
where one city that is the exact polar opposite in the Midwest, and expect those different contexts to behave identically. They will not. And then the compliance level plummets in one,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in, say, the affluent community, they don't care oftentimes if there's a $40,000 differential on a price of land, when the price of land is millions of dollars. And one
Mm-hmm.
woman once told me that her sofa was $30,000. So poof, like, okay, well,
Yeah,
right. And in a very less
you
affluent
could buy a
society,
car.
exactly, where you can buy a car, or like in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I know a few things and
Mhm.
several people. Um, they say you can actually buy a house for 40 grand. Now, it's not
Yeah,
necessarily desirable for most home, but it's a house on a piece of
it's
property,
a house. Yeah.
right? So very different. But to assume that you can put the same policy in both places is folly, and the compliance
Mm-hmm.
level will plummet, and that won't be highlighted, that won't be heralded. The putting in place the policy will, but the actual
Yeah.
outcome of it will not
It's
necessarily
not
be.
really being tracked, right?
Right,
Until it becomes a big enough problem that it has to be. My
exactly.
neurospicy brain, again, when you were talking about the sort of property value difference in different places,
Hmm.
this is very true, but it's also, where do you work that into the profitability for some of these things, where you could say, like, there are plenty of houses that are very affordable for you to purchase and renovate and remodel with reused materials to make them a higher, more valuable. Like, you could go into places like that
Right,
and remodel, and with these materials, these places that are less expensive, right? That's just a whole other podcast for us to have
Yeah.
that conversation of like, how do we work that one in there and get people interested? Like, hey, HGTV, why don't you start doing complete community renovations with reused materials? We know somebody who's working on the reuse of the materials. Larry can help you out. Be a consultant for HGTV, and let's get this rolling and build some communities from some reused materials that are still absolutely viable and valuable.
Right.
I love it.
I love it too. I love it too. And we tend to, I personally like to lead with the positive. You know, there's a lot of gloom and doom and angst and disappointment and all that going on. But I'm like, you know what? Used materials that are already here don't have any tariffs. There's one.
Hey,
No tariff,
that's kind of a
right?
big deal right now. That's
Yep. Kind of a big deal, right? And in our regional approach, you know, you won't have to ship as much if you actually have people aware and available and accessible. The materials are accessible and available online and so forth. Well, and you can choose from a regional model. Well, then they don't get shipped as far, because the bottom line is we're used and reused is competing with new. In the carbon footprint, if you want to go into that world, it already has multiples, not just nudges, not just a few percent. I'm talking multiples, like a 2x4 versus a 2x4, new versus used, has a 13x multiple in the carbon footprint benefit. Okay, that's a lot of latitude. So,
and that's a lot of, again, you know, maybe not necessarily profitable per se. You can't, like, can you put a dollar value on how much better it is for the planet to use materials over again? You know, there is that angle too. Like, it's a little bit priceless, guys. Don't we want to invest in that? And I think there are people out there who do. And I
there
do
are,
appreciate you so much for leaning into the positive, and for, because you have to lean into the positive in order to see that there is a new possibility available. And I think it's brilliant that you have all these. I'm loving just all of this. I love this whole idea. I love all of these things. You're going to have to come back and keep us updated with what
I
you're
would love
working
to do
on.
that, and I appreciate your interest and your passion around all of it, and your the whole neuro. What was the word?
Neurospicy. I just have so many
Neurospicy.
different.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Neurospicy.
Well, you are too. That's why you could follow the whole conversation with me and dive in and out of things and still keep track of where we're at. So
Oh,
appreciate you for that as well.
likewise. So thank you. I'd love to come back. This has been great, and you're a marvelous and entertaining and very insightful host. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Larry LaMotte, thank you for joining us here on Frankie's Open Mic. You will come back again, because we must
Yes,
continue
ma'am.
this brilliant idea that you have. I'm all for it. I'm all
Okay.
in.
Thank you.
Like, I'm here to serve. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to connect with Larry. I'll have your LinkedIn profile and the links in the description below. Go connect with him if you want to be a part of the mastermind. And if you want to check out his website, we've got the link there for you as well. Oh, I've so enjoyed this conversation. Big love bubbles to you, Larry, and big love bubbles to the audience. Hey, I love it. So good. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Haleigh.
Larry. Big thanks to you.
Big thanks to you too.